had orders from General Johnson on this date to embark for Crown Point with a party of 4 men in quest of a prisoner. At night we landed on the west side of Lake George. The remainder of the way we marched by land, and the 26th came in sight of the fort. In the evening we approached nearer, and the next morning found ourselves within about 300 yards of it. My men lay concealed in a thick of willows, while I crept something nearer to a large pine log, where I concealed myself by holding bushes in my hand. Soon after sunrise, the soldiers issued out in such numbers that my men and I could not possibly join each other without a discovery. About 1 o'clock, a single man marched out directly towards our ambush. When I perceived him within 10 yards of me, I sprang over the log and met him and offered him quarters, which he refused, and made a pass at me with a dirk, which I avoided, and presented my fusee to his breast. But notwithstanding, he still pushed on with resolution, and obliged me to dispatch him. This gave an alarm to the enemy, and made it necessary for us to hasten to the mountain. I arrived safe at our camp the 30th, with all my party.
Even before the American Revolution, those in charge of the British Army seek to employ a distinct brand of soldier. In the midst of the French and Indian War, Robert Rogers is tasked with assembling for the King's Army any and all volunteers willing to operate under terrain and conditions previously unexperienced by the British regulars. Initially crucial in scouting and collecting intelligence, after initial setbacks fighting in early, unsuccessful campaigns against the French and Indians, eventually mature into the British Army's ace in the hole. With the establishment of the Rangers, the British are now able to exact victory in the French and Indian War. The tenacity, cunning, and fearlessness exhibited by Rogers' Rangers will become an inspiration for not only the U.S. Army Rangers. Indeed, Rogers' 28 rules of ranging are still used in the training of Army Rangers today, but the very foundation upon which the entire United States Special Operations Command, or SOCOM, is built. Today, SOCOM is focused more than ever on counterterrorism efforts in order to effectively combat dangerous, radical organizations and individuals that operate abroad, as well as at home. Soldiers operating under SOCOM are tasked with using unconventional means, much like Rogers' Rangers, in order to protect the safety and well-being of American citizens and our allies in combat and emergency situations. The United States Special Forces accomplish this goal by operating under a set of guidelines known as the 5 Truths. Truth 1. Humans are more important than hardware. People, not equipment, make the critical difference. The right people, highly trained and working as a team, will accomplish the mission with the equipment available. On the other hand, the best equipment in the world cannot compensate for a lack of the right people. Truth 2. Quality is better than quantity. A small number of people, carefully selected, well-trained, and well-led, are preferable to larger numbers of troops, some of whom may not be up to the task. Truth 3. Special Operations Forces cannot be mass-produced. It takes years to train operational units to the level of proficiency needed to accomplish difficult and specialized SOF missions. Intense training, both in SOF schools and units, is required to integrate competent individuals into fully capable units. This process cannot be hastened without degrading ultimate capability. Truth 4. Competent Special Operations Forces cannot be created after emergencies occur. Creation of competent, fully mission-capable units takes time. Employment of fully capable Special Operations capability on short notice requires highly trained and constantly available SOF units in peacetime. Truth 5. Most special operations require non-SOF assistance. The operational effectiveness of our deployed forces cannot be, and never has been achieved without being enabled by our joint service partners. the support of Air Force, Army, Marine, and Navy engineers, technicians, intelligence analysts, and the numerous other professions that contribute to SOF have substantially increased our capabilities and effectiveness throughout the world. In a 2015 speech before the House Armed Services Committee on Emerging Threats and Capabilities, General Joseph L. Votel, U.S. Army Commander, United States Special Operations Command, succinctly described the exceptional type of soldier needed to serve as a member of the United States Special Forces.
USACOM's highly specialized military and civilian personnel, our quiet professionals, are asked to respond to our nation's most complex, demanding, and high-risk challenges. Building this skilled and specialized force is a demanding, time-intensive process. Every day, our forces put forth an extraordinary level of effort and personal sacrifice while enduring grueling physical and mental demands to meet mission requirements. They deserve our admiration and gratitude, along with all of our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. They are all part of a team doing essential work on behalf of our nation.
The essential work to which General Votel refers in the 21st century is also essential to European settlers in 18th century America. In addition to colonists hailing from the British Empire, the French and Spanish also vied to stake claims in the New World, with the Spanish establishing colonies in southern territories such as Florida, and the French to the north and west, with territory stretching from the Gulf of St. Lawrence, Newfoundland, all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. While the British, with colonies in the Carolinas and Georgia, enter into very few skirmishes with the Spanish colonists in Florida, the relationship with the French is decidedly much more contentious. Although vastly outnumbered by the British, the French are assisted in their fight for the New World by an essential ally, native Indian tribes. From as far back as 1627, and even earlier encouragement from Louis XIII and Cardinal Richelieu, the French settlers cultivate peaceable relations with the Indians. The Ordinance of 1627 grants the natives French citizenship on the provision that they convert to Christianity.
The descendants of the French who are accustomed to this country, together with all the Indians who will be brought to the knowledge of the faith and will profess it, shall be deemed and renowned natural Frenchmen, and as such may come to live in France when they want, and acquire, donate, and succeed, and accept donations and legacies, just as true French subjects, without being required to take no letters of declaration of naturalization.
SOCOM's first of 5 truths states, simply, humans are more important than hardware. Throughout King George's War, one man establishes himself as a superior ranger, and at the onset of the final French and Indian War, that man is tasked with recruiting the best of the best to serve as rangers. Robert Rogers, born to Irish immigrants in Massachusetts in 1731, enlisted in the newly raised New Hampshire militia as a teenager in 1746. He serves as a scout in several regiments, and by the time Britain squares off with the French and Indians, Rogers has established himself as an invaluable tracker, soldier, scout, and spy. When Rogers initially recruits his rangers, he does not seek traditionally trained British soldiers. The French, employing the Indians' superior knowledge of the terrain and guerrilla-style tactics, not only render typical European maneuvers useless, but their armor and cavalry as well. A ranger fighting for the British must possess the skill and drive of the hunter, the trapper, the militiaman, and the Indian hunter. The ranger not only differs from British troops by their movements on the field of battle and espionage, but from the very uniform as well. The red uniform worn by many British soldiers essentially makes them walking targets on the field of battle in the Americas. Rogers Rangers units utilize shades of dark green in their uniform in an effort to blend into the wooded surroundings. Most Rangers never wear a particular or consistent uniform pattern, and other Ranger units use brown and gray in their dress, which often include a variety of specially trimmed jackets, waistcoats, or shirts to keep the uniform light. Their varied appearance leads the British Army Redcoats to dub them irregulars. Their dress is not the only distinction from the regular British Army. Rangers are typically used to working alone or in small numbers, not the rigidly regimented and regulated world of the British soldier. Many regulars and their commanders often judge the Rangers harshly for their, to them, outlandish attire, unconventional thinking and attitudes, and their insistence to serve alongside Black and Indian Rangers. However, for all of these reasons and more, the Rangers proved themselves to be an essential part of the British victory in the French and Indian War. Rogers successfully raises another Ranger unit, the Queen's Rangers, for Britain in 1776, and successfully captures the Patriot spy Nathan Hale. In 1777, Robert Rogers is forced into early retirement, officially due to poor health. In spite of his service to the Crown during the Revolution, Rogers has set into practice tactics now utilized both by the Continental Army and the Redcoats, perhaps leveling the field of battle during the American Revolution.
Vigorous measures at present would soon put an end to this rebellion. The deluded people are made to believe that they are invincible. When this army is ordered to act against them, they will soon be convinced that they are very insignificant and opposed to regular troops.
While Rangers, Sharpshooters, and other irregulars are deployed by both sides during the American Revolution, the Patriots still hold a certain edge over the Redcoats. The vast distances and the time required to transport British troops across the Atlantic constantly keep the numbers of Redcoats inferior to those of the American fighters. The British soon find that they cannot hold a conquered territory while simultaneously winning the next battle. Laws in Britain at the time add to the number of British troops, but not to the competency or loyalty of its soldiers. Some criminals are pardoned and sent overseas to fight. Officers and other high-ranking positions are able to be bought, and while the soldier may be wealthy, this is no guarantee of advantage on the battlefield. Many of those who fight for the Americans are born and raised in the country, know the terrain well, and are willing to sacrifice everything for American independence. Little is known about the life of Timothy Murphy before the American Revolutionary War, but his exploits and skill as a rifleman and sharpshooter during the conflict are paramount. Regardless of the man's seeming anonymity before and after the Revolution, as President Franklin Delano Roosevelt notes while dedicating a monument to Murphy at Saratoga in 1929.
This country has been made by Timothy Murphys, the men in the ranks. Conditions here called for the qualities of the heart and head that Tim Murphy had in abundance. Our history should tell us more of the men in the ranks, for it was to them, more than to the generals, that we were indebted for our military victories.
Shortly after the onset of the Revolutionary War, Timothy and his brother John both enlist in Captain John Loudon's company of the Northumberland County Riflemen. 2 years later, after a promotion to sergeant of the 12th Pennsylvania Regiment and serving in the Siege of Boston and Battle of Long Island, Timothy Murphy is one of 500 marksmen selected to serve with Morgan's Riflemen, a newly formed regiment for sharpshooters. By 1777, Murphy is reportedly able to hit a target 7 inches square from 250 yards. His marksmanship is legendary, and Murphy reportedly earns the nickname Sure Shot Tim. This moniker most likely has its origins in the Second Battle of Saratoga, also known as the Battle of Bemis Heights. While some historians dispute the story, it is still widely thought that Timothy Murphy fells 2 British senior officers during the battle. Morgan's riflemen are ordered by General Benedict Arnold, at this time still serving with the Continental Army, to dispose of Brigadier General Simon Fraser, currently rallying British forces that had been pushed back. Morgan calls to the best of his riflemen to carry out Arnold's order. Timothy Murphy takes a position in a tree 300 yards from the battlefield, and upon the sight of Fraser, fires 4 shots. The 3rd shot strikes Fraser in the midsection, knocking him from his horse. The brigadier general is taken from the battlefield and dies that evening. Murphy is also credited with the shot that killed Sir Francis Clerke, aide-de-camp to General John Burgoyne, British commander of the forces in Lake Champlain and Hudson River Valley. As Clerke rode onto the battlefield with a message, Murphy again fires 4 shots, the last striking Clerke. According to legend, Clerke is dead before he hits the ground. While these events are still debated, Murphy is almost single-handedly responsible for keeping raiding British forces at bay during the defense of Middle Fort in New York's Schoharie Valley. By 1780, Timothy Murphy's term of service with Morgan's riflemen has expired. Settling in the Schoharie Valley, Murphy soon enlists in Captain Jacob Hager's company of the 15th Regiment of the Albany County Militia, which makes a valiant effort to protect the New York frontier from the British. The Schoharie Valley was a chief supplier of wheat to the American Army, and in September of 1780, Colonel Sir John Johnson prepares to lead around 1,000 British soldiers and supporters in a campaign to decimate the wheat supply. By this time in the war, the settlers of the area have seen raid after raid of British troops attacking their homes and farms. Along the Schoharie River, the residents of Schoharie have built 3 forts, Upper, Middle, and Lower, in defense against the British. On the 17th of October, 1780, a farmer spots Johnson's column marching past Upper Fort. The alarm gun in Upper Fort was fired, and the settlers soon took defensive positions. Their cover blown, Johnson's raiders began to burn buildings and destroy much of the livestock and crops they encountered. A party of militiamen, including Murphy, are sent into the fray from Middle Fort to assess the situation and engage the enemy. The militia are soon beaten back into the fort as the British unload rifles, cannon, and mortar fire towards Middle Fort. While the ordnance was superior to the colonists, Middle Fort proved a strong defense against the British barrage. Johnson sees that continued shelling of the fort would only waste time and ammunition. So, in a change of tactic, Colonel Johnson sends a truce party towards the fort to broker surrender. Murphy and the other riflemen have heard about the horrors that often befell those captured by the British. They refuse to surrender. Murphy fires a shot above the heads of the truce party. The redcoats hastily retreat. The commander of Middle Fort, Major Woolsey, is incensed at Murphy and wants to welcome the surrender party as they attempt to make a return. As Woolsey issues an order for the fort to raise the white flag, Murphy threatens to fire upon anyone who attempts to do so, saying, "I'll die before they have me prisoner." With Middle Fort's seemingly inexhaustible resistance, Johnson soon abandons the siege and moves down the river to Lower Fort, where the British again meet strong opposition. The raiding, burning, and destruction continues to ruin the Schoharie Valley, but the forts remain untaken, and American casualties are fewer than 3. The bravery, skill, and dedication of individuals like Timothy Murphy ensure that while the grain and livestock crops take an almost crippling blow, the area remains in American control. Thanks to hidden caches of grain and livestock, the settlers of the Schoharie Valley soon rebuild and replant. Murphy's reputation as a hero to the valley is cemented, and the monument at Saratoga still stands as a testament to the power of humans over hardware.
His Excellency depends upon the colonels for good men, such as they can recommend for their sobriety, honesty, and good behavior. He wishes them to be from 5 feet 8 inches high to 5 feet 10 inches, handsomely and well made. And as there is nothing in his eyes more desirable than cleanliness in a soldier, he desires that particular attention may be made in the choice of such men as are neat and spruce. The general neither wants men with uniforms or arms, nor does he desire any man to be sent to him that is not perfectly willing and desirous of being of this guard.
Nearly a year after the Second Continental Congress names George Washington as General and Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, Washington's Life Guard, also known as the Commander-in-Chief's Guard, is developed. Charged with the protection of Washington, as well as the official papers and money of the Continental Army, the Guard is first recruited from each regiment present at the Siege of Boston. 4 men from each regiment are chosen, and the Life Guard grew from 180 men to 250 men as the Continental Army stationed itself near British forces in Morristown, New Jersey. Later recruitment efforts make sure that each of the 13 states are represented among the personnel of the Commander-in-Chief's Guard to ensure the honorable and coveted positions present a united front among the colonies fighting for independence. The uniform worn by the Life Guard is a blue coat with white facings, white waistcoat and breeches, black half-gaiters, and a cocked hat with a blue and white feather. Historian Benson Lossing describes the flag of the Guard in his 1850 pictorial field book of the Revolution.
The flag is white silk, on which the device is neatly painted. One of the Guard is seen holding a horse, and is in the act of receiving a flag from the genius of liberty, who is personified as a woman leaning upon the Union shield, near which is the American eagle. The motto of the Corps, "Conquer or Die," is upon a ribbon.
The Commander-in-Chief's Guard is ostensibly the precursor to the United States Secret Service, which today provides protection to the President of the United States, their families, former presidents, and presidential candidates. Their responsibilities also include protection of United States currency, including investigations of counterfeiting and major fraud. Though the Life Guard provides invaluable service throughout the rest of the American Revolutionary War, by 1782, Britain has voted to cease all military operation in America, and the unit is disbanded on November 15, 1783. 6 months later, the Constitution of the United States is ratified, and a new nation is born. It is the 19th of August in 1781. General Washington and Lieutenant General Jean-Baptiste Rochambeau of the French Army begin a celebrated march from Newport, Rhode Island. 4,000 French and 3,000 American soldiers are mobilized toward southeastern Virginia, where General Cornwallis of the British Army has begun fortifying Yorktown with earthworks and redoubts. Early in October, Washington is ready to begin engaging with the enemy, and a corps of sappers and miners secretly commenced the construction of trenches in order to execute a siege upon the British. In 1775, the Continental Congress commissions a chief engineer of the Continental Army. By 1777, the commander of the Corps of Engineers is Louis Lebègue du Portail. Born in Orléans, France in 1743, and educated in Mézières, du Portail, a qualified engineer officer, is secretly sent to America in 1777 as part of an agreement brokered by Benjamin Franklin with the government of King Louis XVI. As the Americans prepare to engage the British at Yorktown, the trenches and fortifications being secretly constructed are done so under Commander Duportail. After General Washington strikes a few initial ceremonial blows with a pickaxe, the engineers, or sappers and miners as they're nicknamed, began the work of building a 2,000-yard trench. 3 days later, on October 9th, the trench is finished and American and French artillery are in place. They begin a relentless barrage against the British, and 2 days later, on October 11th, are already moving the parallel to a position 400 yards closer to the British lines. The trench cannot be extended as far as the York River, as the first had been, because of the position of the British redoubts numbers 9 and 10. But no matter. Cornwallis was unaware of the American and French movements, and by the morning of the 12th, the Allies have positioned themselves upon the new, closer line. The Corps of Engineers work tirelessly as the Americans and French move closer still. And on October 14th, plans are made for an assault on British redoubts 9 and 10. Sergeant Joseph Plunn Martin of the Continental Corps of Sappers and Miners describes his company's orders.
The sappers and miners were furnished with axes and were to proceed in front and cut a passage for the troops through the abatis, which are composed of the tops of trees, the small branches cut off with a slanting stroke, which renders them as sharp as spikes.
Alexander Hamilton, leading the charge under Redoubt No. 10, gave orders for the sappers and miners to stay behind and let the infantry do all the fighting. Martin's account continues.
As soon as the firing began, our people began to cry, "The fort's our own," and it was, "Rush on, boys!" The sappers and miners soon cleared a passage for the infantry, who entered it rapidly. Our miners were ordered not to enter the fort, but there was no stopping them. "We will go," they said. "Then go to the devil," said the commanding officer.
By October 16th, it is clear to Cornwallis that the American and French bombardment shall not be deterred. It appears to the British that the American and French allies have a competition going. Which of them will be able to do more damage to the enemy line? An evacuation attempt is made by Cornwallis via the York River. Only one wave of vessels are able to cross the river before a squall hits and entraps the British. Their fate, it seems, is surrender. On the morning of October 17th, the British send out a drummer and an officer, waving the white handkerchief. General Washington, as well as many others, placed this victory at Yorktown among the Corps of Sappers and Miners' finest hours. Later, speaking very highly of Commander Duportail, Washington says,
"His plan and conduct of the late attacks in the successful siege of Yorktown afford brilliant proofs of his military genius and set the seal of his reputation."
The work of these unconventional soldiers and their tactics prove incredibly useful at both the beginning and the end of the American Revolution, to both sides of the conflict. As America continues to develop as its own sovereign nation, these irregular soldiers shall be called upon time and again on the field of battle.
I am not ashamed of having fought on the side of slavery. A soldier fights for his country, right or wrong. He's not responsible for the political merits of the course he fights in. The South was my country.
Initially, John Singleton Mosby is opposed to the South's secession from the United States. However, a sense of loyalty to the country he calls home persuades Mosby to enlist as a private in the Confederate Army at the outset of the American Civil War. After serving under William Grumble Jones in the Washington Mounted Rifles and later the Virginia Volunteers, General Jeb Stuart takes notice of Mosby's aptitude for intelligence gathering. Mosby is promoted to first lieutenant and assigned to the general's cavalry scouts. while cavalrymen from both the Union and the Confederacy will develop into invaluable and formidable fighters. At the beginning of the Civil War, Southerners are thought to have a distinct advantage as horsemen. In the less urbanized South, horses are used more for personal transportation, rather than for pulling carts, wagons, and streetcars, as they are in the cities of the North. The Confederate cavalryman, much like Rogers' Rangers and other early irregulars, is more suited for guerrilla combat tactics over rough roads, through unforgiving forests, and all manner of typically unpassable areas, all on horseback. In June of 1863, under the authority of General Robert E. Lee, John Mosby forms and assumes command of the 43rd Battalion, Virginia Cavalry. The battalion is later more famously known as Mosby's Raiders.
The indomitable and irrepressible Mosby is again in the saddle, carrying destruction and consternation in his path. One day in Richmond, wounded and eliciting the sympathy of everyone capable of appreciating the daring deeds of the boldest and most successful partisan leader the war has produced. 3 days afterwards, surprising and scattering a Yankee force at Salem as if they were frightened sheep fleeing before a hungry wolf.
In 1862, the Confederate Congress had passed the Partisan Ranger Act in an effort to stimulate recruitment of irregular soldiers. Throughout the rest of the Civil War, Mosby's Raiders, often under cover of night, execute small raids with units of 20 to 80 men behind Union lines. Their objectives complete, the partisans then swiftly retreat, often dispersing throughout the area and hiding on farms or in areas that are sympathetic to the rebels. In 1906, John W. Munson, one of Mosby's Raiders, publishes a memoir detailing his life and exploits with the Raiders, including details about their uniform requirements, or lack thereof.
Something gray was the one requisite of our dress, and the cost of it mattered little. Much of it was paid for by Uncle Sam out of the money we got from him directly and indirectly.
Only when performing raids are Mosby's Raiders sporting anything resembling the proper Confederate uniform. The tactics used by the Raiders often make traveling in uniform a hindrance. The mounted guerrillas of Mosby's Raiders, though essentially cavalrymen, also hold little regard for the traditional weaponry of combat on horseback. Unwieldy and inaccurate while riding, the musket proves more useful in the hands of Mosby's Raiders as a club when pulled from the hands of a Union cavalryman in a skirmish. Instead, Mosby's men each carry two 44 Colt Army revolvers, and when the Union forces begin to notice their usefulness in the hands of the partisans, soon Northern cavalry units begin to favor the pistol as well. One piece of cavalry gear that Mosby has no use for is the saber. Munson continues,
I never actually saw blood drawn with a saber but twice in our war, though I saw them flash by the thousands at Brandy Station. Mosby used to say they were as useless against a skillfully handled revolver as a wooden sword of harlequins.
It is a true testament to the first truth of the Special Forces: humans over hardware. Mosby's men, even facing criticism from fighters on their own side, who decry the Raiders' abandonment of more traditional tactics and weaponry, continue to harass and successfully elude Union forces. While analysts and historians struggle to define Mosby's Raiders' overall contribution to the Confederate war effort, it is known that Grant expended great resources to protect Federal troops from the partisans. After Mosby and his men derailed a train and captured $170,000 of Federal payroll, it becomes necessary for the Federal troops to guard every wagon train, railroad bridge, and camp with enough active and efficient men to prevent Mosby from using his 300 Raiders in one of his destructive rushes at any hour of the day or night. General Grant, at one point, reports that 17,000 of his men are engaged in keeping Mosby from attacking his weak points, and thus away from active service on the firing line. Finally, it is not even safe to send dispatches by a courier unless a regiment is sent along to guard him. While the Raiders definitely prove themselves a force to be reckoned with, the irregulars still face the same criticism given to earlier such units. As with Rogers' Rangers during the Revolution, much of it from their own side. In 1864, bowing to pressure from high-ranking Confederate generals, the Confederate Congress deauthorizes partisan or irregular units, allowing only 2 to continue its operation. One of them, of course, is Mosby's Raiders. This distinction is short-lived, but soon replaced with another. The following year brings Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox. Shortly thereafter, Mosby contacts Union Major General Winfield S. Hancock to negotiate a surrender in Winchester, Virginia. When the two men are unable to come to agreeable terms, Mosby instead decides to disband the 43rd Battalion, effectively never surrendering. Mosby speaks to his troops on April 21, 1865.
I disband your organization in preference to surrendering it to our enemies. I am no longer your commander. After an association of more than 2 eventful years, I part from you with a just pride in the fame of your achievements and grateful recollections of your generous kindness to myself. And now, at this moment of bidding you a final adieu, accept the assurance of my unchanging confidence and regard. Farewell.
During the Civil War, the Northern Army faces an enemy seemingly better suited to irregular tactics and guerrilla warfare than themselves. Vermont native and Medal of Honor recipient Lieutenant Colonel William Y.W. Ripley of the Union Army outlines his time with Company F of the 1st United States Sharpshooters and outlines the formation of the regiment in his 1883 book, Vermont Riflemen in the War for the Union.
Very soon after the outbreak of the War for the Union, immediately, in fact, upon the commencement of actual operations in the field, it became painfully apparent that, however inferior the rank and file of the Confederate armies were in point of education and general intelligence to the men who composed the armies of the Union, however imperfect and rude their equipment and material, man for man, they were the superiors of their northern antagonists in the use of arms. Recruited mainly from the rural districts, their armies were composed mainly of men who had been trained to the skillful use of the rifle in that most perfect school, the field and forest, and the pursuit of the game so abundant in those sparsely settled districts. These men, who came to the field armed at first to a large extent with their favorite sporting or target rifles, and with a training acquired in such a school, were individually more than the equals of the men of the North, who were, with comparatively few exceptions, drawn from the farm, the workshop, the office, or the counter, and whose lifelong occupations had been such as to debar them from those pursuits in which the men of the South had gained their skill. Indeed, there were many in many regiments in the Northern armies, men who had never even fired a gun or any description at the time of their enlistment. To remedy this state of affairs, and to make certain that the best weapons procurable should be placed in the hands of the men best fitted to use them effectively, it was decided by the War Department early in the summer of 1861 that a regiment should be organized, to be called the 1st Regiment of United States Sharpshooters, and to consist of the best and most expert rifle shots in the northern states. The detail of the recruiting and organization of this regiment was entrusted to Hiram Berdan, then a resident of the city of New York, himself an enthusiastic lover of rifle shooting and an expert marksman.
Hiram Berdan of New York is also a noted inventor, and though he has no military training, many of his innovations in weapons technology, as well as the development of commercial gold amalgamation machines used to separate gold from ore, bring him great fortune and influence. Berdan proposes the establishment of stringent marksmanship testing in order to create an elite unit of sharpshooters. In a New York Times report from August 1861, the details of the test are described.
No man is admitted who does not shoot, at 600 feet distance, 10 consecutive shots at an average of 5 inches from the bullseye. That is, the aggregate distance of the whole 10 shots must not exceed 50 inches. Not a man is accepted under any circumstances who varies a hairbreadth from the mark. Remarkable though it may seem, many of the men exceeded this proficiency. Colonel Berdan himself has, on a windy day with a strange rifle, put 10 balls within an average of 1 inch and 1/10 each from the bullseye at 600 feet.
While most regiments formed during the Civil War consisted of soldiers and companies all from the same state, the 1st and 2nd United States Sharpshooters are required to build each unit from riflemen recruited from a variety of Union locales due to the incredibly thorough and strict recruiting procedures. Initially, the sharpshooters are equipped with a variety of different weapons, but logistics pertaining to ammunition supplies forces Berdan to order an issuance of Sharps rifles for his men from the Union Army. The Sharps rifle is capable of being fired 8 to 10 times per minute at incredible speed and 3 times the rate of the Springfield. While this rate is viewed by the sharpshooters as advantageous, Lieutenant General Winfield Scott denies Berdan's request. Scott fears that the faster firing rifle will quickly diminish the ammunition supply. Unsatisfied, Berdan takes his request to President Lincoln himself, and after Berdan and some of his best sharpshooters demonstrate the Sharps rifle's accuracy and efficiency, Lincoln orders the weapon to be issued to both the 1st and 2nd United States sharpshooters. While the arms become more standardized, some soldiers still use their own personal firearms. Many of these have been modified to adjust the accuracy, and a few of them even utilize early versions of telescopic sights. Berdan's sharpshooters are initially outfitted in green, one of a small number of units not wearing the standard blue of the Union Army. Brass buttons were not used, and the pants and frock coats were made from the same green material. The color of the uniforms is useful in camouflage and guerrilla warfare tactics, but becomes a visible target for Confederate soldiers. Not only does the green stand out amongst the blue of their fellow soldiers marching on the field of battle, the sharpshooters' reputation also makes them a prized, sought-after kill among Confederate soldiers. The 1st and 2nd United States sharpshooters are viewed even by the enemy as vital to the Union Army's efforts. Not unlike Mosby's raiders, it's all about recruiting the right soldiers to do the right job.
It was useless to talk to him about the rules of war. Blood for blood was his motto, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth.
When the Civil War broke, Jack Henson, a plantation owner and businessman who lives in the Between the Rivers region around Kentucky and Tennessee, initially favors neutrality. Though Henson is a slave owner, he does not favor secession, and he is even more averse to war. When 2 of Henson's sons are apprehended by Union cavalrymen, the younger Hensons are put to death under suspicion of participating in guerrilla actions for the Confederates. Adding insult to injury, the young men are decapitated and the heads sent home to the Henson plantation. A Union officer places them on the gateposts in front of the Henson's home. Jack Henson finds that in spite of his protest against the war, the bloody conflict has literally been delivered to his doorstep. Henson, incensed, commissioned a one-of-a-kind 50 caliber, 18-pound Kentucky rifle, freed all of his slaves, and then set out to avenge his sons. First, Henson fells the lieutenant and soldier who were responsible for his sons' deaths. Henson's rifle could hit targets nearly a half-mile away, and the unstoppable marksman trained his sights on anyone with a blue Union uniform, on land or on transports and gunboats along the Tennessee and Cumberland River. One Union gunboat, barely made it through Henson's hail of bullets, assured that there was a detachment of possibly hundreds of Confederates bearing down on them. But Henson worked alone, killing over 100 men by some estimations, with 36 confirmed kills, as noted by the number of notches made along the barrel of his rifle.
They murdered my boys, and may yet kill me, but the marks on the barrel of my gun will show that I am a long ways ahead in the game now and not done yet.
Henson is not the only lone gunman operating ostensibly on the side of the Confederates. Until 1862, the Confederate Army allowed the actions of independent marksmen and guerrillas before the formation of the Partisan Rangers, made of the same irregulars who had proven so valuable to armies of the Revolution and to the Union. While Henson's rifle has become legend, it can be argued that the skills and tactics of the man behind the .50 caliber made all the difference.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help us produce more compelling historical content like this, please like, comment below, and share this video with fellow history buffs. And of course, be sure to subscribe to help keep history happening.